Rome, 1481 AD. Despite its medieval roots, the center of Christianity is about to become a serious player in the Italian Renaissance. The main chapel of the Apostolic Palace, commissioned by Pope Sixtus IV, has just been completed and is now being decorated. If we could hear the noise coming from inside, it would be the creaking of shaky scaffolding on which a small, silent gang of painters, assistants, and collaborators is moving around, intent on frescoing its high walls. We'd also see, among others, Domenico Ghirlandaio, Sandro Botticelli, Luca Signorelli, Bartolomeo della Gatta, Cosimo Rosselli, and finally him, Pietro di Cristoforo Vannucci, the head of this enterprise, known to everyone by his artistic name, the Perugino.
Today, we are fairly certain that Perugino was at the helm of the project at the Sistine Chapel, in part because by then, he had already met the Pope and grown accustomed to the city of Rome. Furthermore, the images we have today seem to be based on a single model, a general layout, or perhaps a direction, an overall and single-minded idea, which clearly indicates one single artist's maturity and experience.
Today, it's harder to grasp the importance of Perugino's work in the Sistine Chapel for one simple reason: the presence of Michelangelo's frescoes, which overshadow and perhaps, admittedly, surpass everything done only a few decades earlier by the great artists of the early 1480s. Indeed, on the back wall, where today we find the Last Judgment, there were 3 scenes painted by Perugino himself.
Undoubtedly, the enterprise of the Sistine Chapel will launch Perugino into the annals of art history.
The director of the National Gallery of Umbria, Marco Pierini, and the art historian Verusca Picchiarelli shall guide us in our tale about the Perugino, alongside the medievalist Franco Cardini.
Between the 1450s and the 1480s, 1490s, peace holds fast in Italy, as if the princes themselves have come to terms with the idea that warring among one another will serve no other purpose than to attract the attention of foreign Christians or even Muslims. Florence in the 15th century is the main center of humanistic culture. Humanism is, of course, more than a single granitic whole. There are several nodes for humanism, such as Naples, Milan, Venice, and Rome. Perugino works at the service of Pope Sixtus IV.
In this time of relative peace, it's certainly easier to move from one place to another, and so traveling is more commonplace. Therefore, after completing the Sistine Chapel, it's difficult for us to trace Perugino's movements.
Unfortunately, we know very little of where Perugino goes immediately after completing the Sistine Chapel. This is certainly a shame, especially since the 1480s are essential for the development of his canon and model.
This is one of the best times for Perugino, as he's courted by many clients. He's moving constantly between Rome, Perugia, and Florence. He opens his first workshops and gathers a stable group of collaborators.
An extraordinary trace of this activity is the so-called Gallitzin triptych in the National Gallery in Washington. This painting is undoubtedly one of the highest achievements of the master, and it presents to us, in full maturity, one of Perugino's great interests, his passion for Flemish art.
Public and private commissions come tumbling fast from all over Italy, and Perugino seems to struggle to keep up with them.
One of our sources says, "Lui piglia più che non può," which means that he takes on much more than he can actually handle. Despite his well-equipped and fully staffed workshops, he's just not able to meet all the demands.
Perugino even starts lying to his clients and promises impossible deadlines. But somehow, jumping from lie to lie, he actually manages to keep the jobs, and at some point, to even complete them.
In the 1480s, Perugino receives an important commission from the municipality of Florence, a fresco for the Sala dei Gigli. However, he never starts the work and loses the commission. At the same time, the municipality of Perugia commissions a very important panel from him, which he promises to complete, and even signs a contract for, but never actually starts working on. It's the panel for the chapel of the Palazzo dei Priori, known as the Pala dei Decemviri, which he will only complete 10 years later.
A document kept at the State Archive of the Umbrian capital tells us that in December 1485, Pietro Vannucci becomes a citizen of Perugia and subsequently a registered painter. While another document kept at the Florentine archive of the Ospedale degli Innocenti informs us that the following year, in 1486, Perugino rents a workshop in Florence.
He rents the same workshop in which Lorenzo Ghiberti created the bronze Gates of Paradise.
It is a rather large workshop, with a house attached to it. There are porticos, so a suitable environment for his activity. It will become well-staffed and very active in the following years.
Around 1486, he must have had at least two very important construction sites open in the Tuscan city. Firstly, one of the greatest enterprises of his life, the decoration of the complex of San Giusto alle Mura. It is such a shame that these extraordinary projects haven't made it to us today. Indeed, the convent of San Giusto alle Mura was demolished in 1529 to strengthen the defenses of Florence during the siege of Charles V. However, we know from Vasari's testimony, which describes in great detail Pietro's works for this complex, that there were exceptional frescoes in the two cloisters and in other rooms of the convent. All that remains of this great complex are three panels, preserved at the Uffizi Gallery and of very different time periods. The Crucifixion, which should date back to the early 1480s, the Lamentation over the Dead Christ, which we can date around 1490, and finally the Prayer in the Garden. This was probably Perugino's last project for San Giusto alle Mura, and dates around the mid-1490s.
In his travels from one city to another, Perugino also proves his versatility, as he's capable of adjusting his works to the tastes of his clients.
Art historians have often puzzled upon a few works of Perugino, which apparently belong to the same period, but use wholly different registers. This is probably because Perugino would adapt his work to his audience. After all, in Rome, he would need to pay attention to the taste for precious imagery, detail, refinement, and luxury, as this is what his patrons there would be seeking. On the other hand, in Florence, taste would be more sober, monumental, and at times even severe. He would be able to make small tonal changes to please, but without compromising on his own identity.
Every now and then, the Perugino disappears. He's untraceable, in Rome as well as in Florence, perhaps simply to escape the demands of his many insistent clients. Based on the few pieces of information we have, we think it's quite possible that these periods he would retreat to the Adriatic coast.
He's often found in Fano, where he works, but he can enjoy the sea as well. We don't know if he would go swimming, but he would certainly relax at the hot springs. Indeed, two documents reveal that in October and perhaps May, he has retreated to the thermal baths. These are just small references of perhaps a greater enjoyment of his for these pleasures. He always seems to enjoy Fano, where he also works on an altarpiece for almost 10 years.
We imagine that Perugino spends several summers in Fano on the Adriatic coast. He creates 3 works there and a few other commissions in Pesaro, so he definitely has an excuse to go. Secondly, I like to imagine that Perugino enjoys the sea. We don't have to picture him anachronistically in trunks as he sunbathes, but it must feel good to get away from the stifling summer heat of Florence, or even of Perugia, Umbria, to take in some sea breeze. And we know from documentation that Perugino did stay at the city monastery, the convent of Santa Maria, during the summer.
Proprio nei mesi della bella stagione.
And it's not just sea retreats. From time to time, Perugino, so measured in his work, gives way to deeply human emotions.
It was often believed that Vasari was exaggerating when he would talk about Perugino's aggressive character, as well as his supposed hard-headedness, like the marble of Carrara. But documents do seem to confirm that he would give in to anger.
We know of one specific incident that took place in 1487, although history hasn't recorded the name of its protagonist. What we do know is that Perugino, along with a small-time painter named Aulista d'Angelo, who was also from Perugia, with their faces covered to avoid being recognized, beat this person with a stick. The man then reports the fact to the authorities. The following legal proceedings are interesting because we can see that Perugino probably lightens his own position and aggravates that of his companion Aulista d'Angelo. The latter, in fact, is sentenced to torture with a rope, while Perugino gets away with just a fine.
He also reports everyone who doesn't pay him on time. He even seizes his own works and refuses to deliver them until he's fully paid. So he's definitely irritable, but also savvy. You can't fool around with Perugino, because he's not just a great painter, but a shrewd businessman who knows how to manage his goods and his workshop.
That's what the life of a Renaissance artist is like. A Renaissance artist must earn the trust and even the admiration of his patron. To do this, the artist must be willing to do anything. Artist needs to become the center of all processes.
In here, such as the beating, are perhaps a sign of Perugino's fame at the time. They are undoubtedly an indicator of the favor and protection he enjoys from Lorenzo de' Medici, magnificent lord of Florence, and a man of great culture, a lover of philosophy, letters, and the arts.
Poets and writers are at the service of the prince because all art must revolve around power, just like satellites rotate around a main planet. All is for the glory of the Medici family.
Perugino is undoubtedly one of the protagonists of the court that gathered around Lorenzo de' Medici, despite being far from the most learned of the men there. He's probably not very educated and likely doesn't care much for philosophy. However, he is very skilled, extremely sought after, and is known for his art of balance and harmony. The wise people of the court are inspired by Neoplatonism, and Perugino, who perhaps doesn't even care much for it himself, is able to bring those ideals to life with his art.
However, the cultural fervor of the Medici court is not destined to last. Upon rereading today, the verses of the first stanza of Bacco's Canzona, written by Lorenzo himself and still remembered today, seem dramatically prophetic. How beautiful our youth is, that's always flying by us. Who'd be happy? Let him be so. Nothing's sure about tomorrow. In 1492, Lorenzo the Magnificent dies unexpectedly. And in the ensuing chaos, the preacher Girolamo Savonarola takes over the city.
Florence, from 1494 to 1498, will be shaken by the dictatorship of Savonarola in a moment of great confusion. The Florentine aristocracy no longer knows how to govern on its own, having been accustomed for decades to the rule of men chosen by the Medici family and functional to the Medici family. Savonarola takes advantage of the distrust and fray of Florentine society. Lorenzo is dead and will be no more. In the chaos, Savonarola is seen as a beckoning light. And his message? He bellows traditional Christian doctrine. You suffer the consequences of your sins. To free yourselves of your sins, you must create a perfect republic based on the gospel. This model demands the abandonment of wealth and the use of said wealth for the benefit of the poor. It requires the abandonment of sin and the rejection of sinful practices. He preaches against gambling, prostitution, and the excess of entertainment. The Florence of Lorenzo, after all, was a city of pleasure. As the dictator of Florence, Savonarola enforces virtue and he imposes it with the support of gangs of youngsters keen to violence, almost predecessors to the future fascist bands. These boys would walk around Florence beating those who would flaunt their wealth and those who would not adhere to the principle of a new morality.
Artists also are required to conform to the new morality. In the bonfires of vanities, the great public burns objects considered vain, worldly, and contrary to Christian teaching. Tragically, much art is burned as well. However, Perugino seems to emerge unscathed from this dark time.
He's hardly a pious man. How does he react to the monk's stranglehold on the city? With a real stroke of luck. Perugino, in the 90s, is already a more devout painter, less interested in mundanity and thus perfect for Savonarola, despite not believing a thing that the monk spouts from his mouth, of course.
Something else, much less spiritual, seems to occupy the thoughts of Perugino, and in all likelihood, lift his spirits, allowing him to ignore the dark times that await Florence, and perhaps all of Italy. We can see it in the face of a Madonna on a throne that he finishes painting in 1493. That round face, tight mouth, and gradually narrowing chin are the features of a wonderful girl who enters Perugino's life, marrying him that same year.
He marries a sweet, beautiful, and elegant young lady.
Her name, Chiara.
È una giovane donna,
A young woman who perhaps is happy to marry a much older man, as this man is the great Pietro Perugino.
del grande Pietro Perugino.
You have listened to Perugino, the greatest master of Italy, a podcast created by Cora Media for the National Gallery of Umbria. Contributors include Marco Pierini, Verusca Picchiarelli, Franco Cardini. The narrator is Christopher Blake, Eric Alexander as Franco Cardini, Caterina Sforza as Verusca Picchiarelli, John Vincent Aquilecchia as Marco Pierini. Editorial care by Davide Savelli. In the editorial office, Anna Iacovino. Sound and music supervision by Luca Micheli. Editing by Lucrezia Marcelli. Post-production by Mattia Liciotti and Cosma Castellucci. Recording engineer Daniele Marinelli. Studio sound engineers Lucrezia Marcelli, Aurora Ricci, and Emanuele Moscatelli. Executive producer Ilaria Celeghin. Special thanks to the entire staff of the National Gallery of Umbria.